At this point in the class, we will start looking at art history. And one of the things to keep in mind is that when looking at art, sometimes you have to step back and look at the much bigger picture of things that are going on culturally, socially, religious aspect, what's going on that's causing this art to be created. For a long history, art and religion sort of go hand in hand. And later on in the lectures, as we'll see, where art starts to break free and art starts to react against things that are going on, or in some cases, maybe they're reacting for something that's going on. So having to look at what's going on, politically and socially, everything that's going on that is affecting this art. So we're starting out with the ancient art. Ancient art going back some 30,000 years. So we'll start off looking at some prehistoric art, then art of the ancients, the Near East, Egyptian art, and Aegean art, mainly around the Mediterranean world. So starting off this example, the Venus of Willendorf, found near Willendorf, Austria. It's a small portable piece. A lot of the prehistoric art is small portable little pieces, hunting and gathering before there was civilization. But these things are important figures, they're important symbols. So really, in a way, we're not exactly sure what this piece was used for. Mainly idea that some type of fertility idol. The head is covered by this crown, sort of faceless, so it's sort of this blanket statement about all women. And sort of the statement is that women are important to the society because they bear children. If we have healthy, fertile women, then our little group, our little community will thrive and grow. So there's this idea that some type of fertility goddess, fertility idol that was used to help ensure the prosperity of the group. One of the most famous sites out there is Stonehenge. So the small picture on the left is Stonehenge that we all know. On the right are the different phases of Stonehenge as this site was built up over time. And for the most part, they feel that this was some type of cosmic calendar, as there's the shift from hunting and gathering to an agrarian society. And it's important to know the seasons. When do we start preparing the fields and to plant the seeds? When to tend to the crops, take care of them. When are signs where we need to harvest the crops and store up the food for the winter so that we can survive through the winter. So pretty popular that looking at this as a giant calendar. So turning to Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, down in the Near East. So the date here for the Nana Ziggurat in Ur, 21,000 to 2050 BCE, before Common Era. Essentially, they have found stuff dating back to that, not specifically that this building is that old or it took them that long to build, but oftentimes they have found stuff that date back several thousand years on some of these locations. So this was a step pyramid, as you can tell. The building method was of sun-dried bricks. Essentially, you just take some mud, some straw, add the straw in there to help give it some stability, and pack it into these forms so that you get nice little bricks. So it's pretty good, cheap, easy material to use out in these desert areas where rain is pretty sparse. Easy to repair any areas that might have eroded. And so the top of this temple was obviously eroded because, over a period of time after the Sumerians left or were conquered, the lower part of the temple was covered, so the upper part basically just eroded away. So one of the main things that we get from the Sumerians is the cuneiform, the earliest form of a written language. While sort of parallel to them, we do have the Egyptians, but their language, hieroglyphs, is pictographs. It's based on pictures. So cuneiform is based on actual syllables of their spoken language. At first, it started out as a type of accounting system so that they were able to track their trades, track their commerce, and slowly it developed into an actual language. And just to the north of them were the Akkadians. The Akkadians were one of the first cultures to start having images that are much more natural and representational. While here on the Victoria Stele of Narmer Sin, Narm Sin can be seen as the largest figure, so they're using the hierarchical scale. If you remember that, bigger is better, front and center, king of the mountain is always an easy rule of thumb when thinking about the hierarchical scale. So as we can see here, it's a carved stone for it. It's a relief sculpture. And, very natural compared to, if you were to look at the Sumerian art, it's very abstract, stylized abstraction to fit their needs. And then another first, the Babylonians. What they give to us is the Hammurabi Code, which I'm sure y'all are familiar with, an eye for an eye, or sometimes tooth for a tooth, also thrown out. That comes from the Code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi wanted to have an official written law. So if you were caught stealing, you would often have a hand chopped off. Kind of barbaric, but at the same time it made you start to think about some of your actions. And over a period of time, with the Babylonians, while they did feel that this is good, effective, same time we might start killing off all of our population, so they started to have a fine, some type of monetary value that one could pay instead of losing a life or an appendage. One of the other things to point out about these different cultures is, they're all fighting each other, and there's always this back and forth of who the superpower is. The big thing is controlling the trade routes along the Mediterranean. So next we have the Ishtar Gate of Babylon. Technically, it should be the Neo-Babylonians. They conquered many, and they were conquered, but then they rose back up, conquered others. So technically the Ishtar Gate should fall under the Neo-Babylonians in Mesopotamia. However, if you notice in the middle of this gate, the entryway, we have an arch. a lot of times people think of the arch and they think of the Romans. The Romans actually did not create the arch. When we get into Roman engineers were masters of using the arch. Basically, once they started to conquer lands and take on the technology of the Babylonians in this case, then they acquired the arch and really used it for all that it could be used for. They really mastered its use, and so oftentimes we think that the Romans invented the arch, but in fact it was the Neo-Babylonians. Along the same area, the Assyrians, and most of the art from the Assyrians is essentially, war and glorifying the king. A lot of the art of a lot of these cultures glorifying the kings, glorifying their conquests, their military might. So here we have the lion hunt. So the Assyrian king showing his bravery and his greatness by going and hunting lions. That he is so great and mighty that the only thing he can hunt is a great and mighty animal. Now we'll turn to Egypt. Egypt being probably the most dominant of the cultures of the area. Their empire spreading all along the Nile into some of the modern day northern Ethiopia along in there, as well as up along the Mediterranean coast up into modern day Turkey at its height. And one of the things, all these cultures, while they're not warring and trying to dominate each other, they are trading, and there's a lot of exchange of ideas, exchange of technology, and image making as well. Especially one important thing to point out with the Egyptians that will come in handy later on. So here we have the Great Sphinx of Giza, built during the Old Kingdom. And so the Old Kingdom is when Egypt was, kind of like a bunch of little city-states, as we'll get to with Greece and Rome. You have all these little kingdoms. They're all sort of separate, but they are, they share the same language, share the same religion. And finally, Narmer decides to unite. He starts to take over parts of the Upper Kingdom and tries to strike a deal with the kings of the Lower Kingdom, basically saying, hey, make me your king. You can stay and rule your area as like a governor. Most of all, we really need to do this because of, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Akkadians, the Hittites, the Syrians. The list kind of goes on and on of all these different other cultures right next to us that they want to come in and take us over, and they want to get rid of us. So let's, unite, be one mighty empire to defend ourselves. They said no, and so Narmer decides to go and take them over. So we have Narmer here holding his club, wearing the crown of the Upper Kingdom, about to take the crown of the Lower Kingdom. And so it's during this time is when you have all of the massive pyramids that are being built, the large funerary complexes that are pretty familiar. with Egyptian and that we typically think of. Also, Egyptian art in general, as you can see, the sort of profile stance of the human, the profile of the figure, that's one thing that never really changes throughout their art. Moving into the Middle Kingdom, when everything sort of falls apart for them, uh, there's really no longer a dominant government. It all sort of falls apart to individual. The upper and lower kingdoms are divided. Um, One of the incidents, the Nile dries up, and so they abandon this idea of massive funerary complexes, and that's when they start to carve into the sides of the cliffs. As it says, they carve into the living rock. They start to change a lot of their building. And so the new kingdom comes about when, once again, Hyskkus conquers Egypt. He brings back together the upper and lower kingdom. So, sort of everything is back to normal. Everything's back to how it used to be. However, they still do not get into all of the pyramid buildings. So here we have Akhenaten and his family. One of the things you notice, it's a little more natural in appearance in this one. So we have Akhenaten with his sister wife Nefertiti, holding his son nephew Tutankhamun, while Nefertiti holds his daughter nieces. Yes, they were brother and sister. Egypt was known for their interbreeding to help keep the bloodline pure. One of the things under Akhenaten that did change is he came up with the idea of a single size block to build everything with. He, standardized sizes of everything. So under him, the massive, massive building campaign. But at the same time, he also came out with ideas of monotheism, that there is only Ra, the sun god, and every other god is false, and you're wasting your time for having worshipped them. So that did not sit too well, and they believe that he was indeed assassinated. So here we have Nefertiti and Tutankhamun, or King Tut, as he's most famously known. One of the things about Tutankhamun, because of his father's being unpopular, his time on the throne was not too long. Tutankhamun came about after his father may or may not have been murdered. And Tutankhamun, the boy king, he did not live long as well. The big popular story is that he died from a chariot race accident. There's all these things that were made up about him, but in actuality, his compromised immune system is what did him in. So, unpopular family. They just kind of wanted to get back to business of usuals of worshiping hippos and hedgehogs and dung beetles and cats. Cats have never forgotten that they've been worshipped. So Tutankhamun never really had a massive funerary complex built. So he was actually buried in a high priest tomb. And so when his tomb was discovered, it was the first fully intact tomb of a pharaoh, whereas before most of the pharaoh's tombs were raided within 3 to 7 years. So a lot of what we know about Egypt comes from his tomb that was found in the 20s. So now we'll turn to the Aegean cultures. The Aegean Sea is up between Greece and Turkey, and these are little island nations that we'll be looking at. So starting with the Cyclades, one of the smaller of the island nations, and when you are a smaller island nation, then basically larger island nations will come and take you over. And one of the things that would happen, basically, the new dominant superpower coming in, like the Minoans that we'll look at, they were just going to get rid of everything that you had. So the unfortunate side of the Cyclades, not a whole lot that we know about them, other than they had a lot of these little statuettes of women. For a long time, not exactly sure what they were for. One of the things they started to come to the conclusion on is that they're finding these in trash heaps, in these trash piles, landfills, basically. And the train of thought is, well, if these are some type of idol of worship, why are they in a trash? Why are they not desecrated? Oftentimes, if you were to replace an idol with a newer idol, the old idol would be ceremonially desecrated in some way, but these were not. There's some where they found evidence of polychrome, some were in some type of clothes. They came in all sizes from about 3 inches up to roughly 3 feet. So in reality, what we really know most about the Cyclades is from their Barbie dolls. That is the newest theory on these. Finding the trash heaps, finding polychrome, some type of paint or ceramic slip on them, as well as being wrapped up in clothing. So one of the other superpowers is Crete, and the Minoans on Crete. One of the things that the Minoans do is they're one of the first cultures that they decorate for purely aesthetic reasons. Finally, someone wants a painting to match the couch. Whereas before, the art typically dealing with the mighty rulers, like we saw the Assyrians, the lion hunt, the Akkadians and the Babylonians, these great mighty rulers, their military conquests. The Minoans were much more interested in something beautiful, something pleasing. One of the other interesting finds is the Dance of the Bull. So many of you are probably familiar with the running of the bulls, where the Minoans would kind of laugh at that and say, that's nice, you run along with the bulls. If you were a real man, you would stand at the end of the causeway waiting for that 1,500-pound angry hamburger to run at you, and you would grab the horns and do a flip over the bull. Thus, you would be doing the dance with the bull. Probably not the best idea to do. However, Minoans thought that was a fun time. One of the next superpower, the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans, mainly known for their metalworking, mainly weaponry and armor. Even as we look at some of their architecture here in just a bit, it is more about defense rather than lavishness. So the Mycenaeans were on mainland Greece, so they become the superpower of the day, taking over the Minoans, and the Minoans had taken over a large part of Greece as well as the Cycladic islands. And then next, here we have the Lion Gate at Mycenae. So this is the mighty gate of their capital. Not really impressive if you think about the Ishtar Gate of the Babylonians. So one of the things about this gate is much more defensive minded. The opening is about big enough for one cart to go through. So it's controlling access in and out of the city. The walls would have been built up, so if you were deciding to come and attack this city, essentially once you got close enough to this gate, it was going to be a world of hurt falling down on you with arrows and stones, boiling oil, and all kinds of nastiness. So while they were an expert at war, they were also expert at defense. All right, so for the next lecture, we'll begin looking at the classical world of Greece and Rome.